Kate, thank you so much. I think we are all impressed with your unique ability to communicate complex concepts in images and simple but powerful ideas. So thank you so much. So now, as we normally do, I'm going to take one or two questions at a time, or two or one. No, it's up to you.
You decide on whether the question needs to be answered, or we can take two. You decide.
So please, concise questions, and I'll take two at a time.
And I really welcome criticisms and disagreements.
Yeah. And you can do it either in English or in Portuguese. Here, Hélio.
Hi, first of all, congratulations. I really liked your explanation. In that graphics that you showed, all the countries, Vietnam has a position that it's really, if you look at it, it looks like it's the better positioning. Do you have an explanation? Did they do something right? So are they going in the right direction?
Hélio.
Thank you for a delightful talk. My question is, consumption is extremely concentrated. Maybe 25% of the world population holds 75% of total consumption. And that is changing rapidly. About 70 to 100 million mass consumers are entering the market every year. How to deal with that within that system that you are proposing? Is that rapid enough in order to deal with the situation that we actually have? Since UN is talking about 2030 as having as the limit to continue to grow concentration of carbon, for instance, how to go about that? Is education of children and youth, does it play a role in what you're saying? You mentioned in passing that there was a need for value change. And I can only see value changing if we deal with the education of children and youth. Since that was not mentioned, I'm asking you about it.
Okay.
It's two questions that beautifully connect with this. I just wonder if anybody had a third question about this picture that I could add, or people have questions about other things. Okay, so let's answer those two. Brilliant, because they both happen to be about this one image. Let me come over here. So, Vietnam. It's definitely sitting alone, isn't it? Let me say one thing first before I say anything particular about Vietnam. We mustn't read too much into the placement of any one particular country as this dot above this one, because we are only just beginning to learn to measure our world this way. So we can say that we'll look back in 10 years and say, that was very crude data, okay? So I don't want to read too much meaning into the, and yet, yes, they are separate and they're in a different place. So why? Vietnam has certainly been a more equitable country than many others, which might help explain why for a certain income level, it's doing better on social foundations, right? But also, let's not make it seem as if it's doing perfectly well, because it's still very much falling short of meeting people's needs. And I know within Vietnam, people would say, but because a lot of what Vietnam is making is being exported. So a lot of Vietnam's environmental impact of the factories in Vietnam is counted here, okay? Because it's, say my jacket was made in Vietnam. The environmental impact of this jacket is counted here for me, because I live in the UK. But it had environmentally damaging impacts here in this country. So it's partly about who we allocate the responsibility to. And if we drew the environmental impacts in the country where it happens, I think Vietnam would do worse on the environmental side, yeah? To your question, absolutely agree. So you said first, most consumption is in a very small proportion of the world. Here they are. And that's why they're here. That's why they're all over here, because the huge impact on the planet of the high lifestyles led here. And of course, it's connected. impacts of these countries are undermining the chances of all of these through resource use, through climate change, water use. It undermines potential for others. Now we have an emerging global middle class, particularly here, partly in India because of the inequalities in these countries. So we have, and what really matters is which way these nations are going. This is just a snapshot. What we all really want to see is movement, right? What you really would like to see is which way are these bubbles going? Are they all going like this? Are any of them going like that? Again, we've only just begun measuring. We have only a snapshot. The next step is to create data over time to see the movement. Your question. The global middle class is emerging very rapidly. Are the changes that I'm talking about happening fast enough? No. No. Why not? There are many vested interests locked into the form of business that's made money for a lot of people for centuries. And the point I'm here to make is the mindset that we teach. So you say I didn't mention education, but actually, in a way, everything you're saying is about education of economists. Maybe too old for the level you want to talk about. What we teach, the mindset we teach to today's students will determine whether the business leaders and the political leaders of tomorrow keep the economies going in this direction, in a deeply destructive way, or they become the first generation with a new mindset that starts taking us this way. But I want to finish with your point about values, because I talked a little bit about values, the parent, the family, the state, the carer, the repairer, the sharer. That is where we do need to transform our values. I think those values lie in each of us already, and we often live by those values when we go home, when we step inside our front door, when we're in our neighborhood with our friends. We live by those values. But there's something about the design of work today, which is when we put on a suit and go to work, it's as if we're told, leave those values at home. Now, this is business. This is business. And I think we need to reconnect so that people can bring their whole selves to work. And business should be conducted in line with the values we hold. That's why we need to transform finance. So I profoundly agree with you on the importance of values in education. And get your kids playing Pandemic.
Can I jump into the conversation before?
Yeah.
You can add something, and I will add something else.
It's a conversation.
And then we can start another round of questions. So go ahead.
I'll just add this. My perception is that companies are in a deep challenge in terms of having their assets stranded to a certain technology lock-in. And that is a big problem to transform these companies towards a new system of regenerative and redistributive design. What would be the solution for that? I was thinking, for instance, would it be necessary for the state to accept that the depreciation of assets at a certain moment in time would not go to loss directly, but would be distributed along the time in order to allow companies to feel comfortable to depreciate immediately some assets and not having the impact on their profit because of the impact on investors, and companies will be really afraid to do so. What is your opinion?
Can I add a somewhat related question to that one, which is the following? Someone said, "Well, you're right that high levels of consumption in those European and the U.S. North American countries, very much concentrated there up until now, but you have to reckon to the fact that Vietnam development is positively affected by that high level of consumption. So if you drastically cut consumption in the developed world, this will mean a drag on the development of Vietnam and other countries which are still in stages of development that do not allow them to provide enough social services to their. So there is a very complicated trade-off in this well, I sympathize entirely with you, but I'm just trying to add complexity.
Great, complexity is great. Okay, Vietnam, is currently selling jackets to these countries, not just on the screen, but in reality on the world map. That is a long way. That's a lot of atoms going a long way. What's happening now is regional markets, right? Vietnam is a lot closer to this country.
Yeah.
And actually these countries have stagnant economies. They're not growing. The growth is here. And I think we're going to now see a rise in South-South trade, as they call it, making a lot more sense economically and ecologically. Atoms should stay locally or regionally. And I think there's going to be new opportunities here. So I like the complexity that you're adding, because often countries like my own justify endless growth by saying, well, if we don't grow endlessly, it'll be really bad for Africa. But at the same time, growing endlessly is really bad for Africa because we're undermining the planet on which we depend. So yes, there are deep complexities in this. To come back to the point on stranded assets, ooh, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because pragmatically, I understand that point. Companies won't let go of their stranded assets. We should pay them off and let them move on. But we have to look at the politics of what companies have done for many decades. Not all companies. Many fossil fuel companies who face the biggest stranded assets were the most active in seeding doubt, in creating chaos. Exxon, intentionally confusing the public, intentionally extending their capacity to invest in fossil fuels and preventing governments from acting. So the idea that they should have made so much money from extending this and now get paid for what they'll lose, it privatizes the gain and socializes the losses. It's all the more important to be extremely clear now. We have to go to net zero carbon emissions very fast. We already have too much oil and gas production in the world and coal. It makes no sense for any country anywhere to be building new, because it will become a stranded asset. And I think that message is incredibly important to put across. I don't know the solution to getting these companies to write off their assets, but I think investors actually will just sell. They will just sell fossil fuel companies because they realize their own money will be stranded there. And more are starting to invest in renewable energy technologies, which they know have a much stronger future than the assets they already see in getting stranded.
That's easier to think about than thinking about companies that will make durable products instead of fast obsolescence.
Yes.
I think you're
Yes.
I think you
Yes.
you stand on solid moral grounds,
Yes.
but still the practical problem remains. I mean, but this is a longer story. Let's move on.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the remarkable presentation. There are many aspects there which are quite familiar to us. The Brockstrom graph,
Yes.
the Kuznets curve.
Yes.
I missed the leapfrogging in the Kuznets.
You missed what, sorry?
The leapfrogging effect in the Kuznets curve, which developing nations can skip
Yes.
those most impactful stages
Yes.
of development. And coming from the background of the IPCC and these scientific reports where we discuss the tragedy of the commons and narratives to policymakers, my question, bluntly speaking, is what's the role of the state? What's the role of multilateralism practically on the world we live in right now?
And what's the role of
The state.
of the state and of the market?
what?
And multilateralism,
And if I
taking
may
into the
add,
consideration the state.
and if I may add, the role of the markets.
Yes, and if I may add, jobs and wages.
This question's getting quite big.
And profits also. And I think this is enough now. Then we can.
Okay.
Can you take this one now?
Yes,
Yeah,
sure.
okay.
So this question is a great question. And that's why I would begin always teaching economics with this diagram. Because from day one, we can have this conversation. And it's political. We don't start with the market. You see, when we start with supply and demand and proving through a mathematical model that the market delivers the optimum unless there's a problem, and then the state should step in. The state only when the market is failing. And then even then, the state may fail. That's the old narrative. This says there are 4 ways of provisioning for our wants and needs, and we can provide through all of them. Think of just even energy services. Many countries for a long time have had state-run energy services. We have private energy services. Now, thanks to distributive technologies, the cost of owning a capacity to generate energy is so small, households can own it. We can move to the commons for the first time. And we also have households. The poorest households burn wood. So we can use all of these forms of provisioning. And there's always the question, given the technologies, given the world's needs, which is the best mix of ways of provisioning to meet them? I think the state has a role not just as providing public services, but it has a particular role of rebalancing the relationship between these 4 forms. You said crudely speaking, I'll put it crudely speaking. Second half of the 20th century, well, actually, more than that, longer. We have seen an excessive dominance of the market encroaching on the household. In the United States, I think women get something like 6 weeks of maternity leave when a child is born and then back to work. And many nations, their state is regulating to protect the importance of household care for women and men, mothers and fathers, protecting the household from the demands of the market. We've also had the encroachment of the market on the commons, taking indigenous knowledge and patenting it, right? Classic move. Encroaching on commons ideas and squeezing them. And I think we need the state to make space for the commons because of this unprecedented opportunity. But I think also the state is nervous about the commons. I see many governments are a little afraid to give people so much power to generate their own electricity, to create complementary currencies, to create open source knowledge. And that's a really interesting relationship as well. Of course, the value and the possibility of the state depends on its accountability. And now this is why economics is inevitably connected to politics. If we think the state is corrupt and ineffective, why would we want to give it a lot of space here? That's why I think people say, I'm a libertarian, I like the market, because they're fed up with the ineffective state. Where the state is effective and held to account, it can play a very, very important role in making this work best of all. So the role of the state, it deeply depends upon the quality of democracy and the quality of institutional accountability. Economics is political.
Okay. Who else? Dimitri. In Russian.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks a lot. My question is, in this system, how do you see the change of the role of money and the concept of money, and link to that the shareholders' value if you talk about the markets? Because we operate on a very monetary basis when you talk about economics, for measuring impacts, for measuring values, and also it becomes the means per se as well. So how do you see the change in the concept and role of money?
That question goes to the heart of everything. I think just as our institutions is designed, money is a design. It's a social construct. And it's really important that we even begin to realize that. You know, back in the financial crisis, many students at university, they began a movement for rethinking, for changing the teaching of economics, because during the financial crisis, they went down to the pub or the bar with their friends in 2008. And their friends said, so, you're studying economics, you tell me what's going on in the world's financial markets. And the students said, I didn't know, because the models we studied didn't have money and banks in them. Money was treated as neutral, which is crazy, because money is an incredibly powerful engine of dynamics itself. So for me, the most important thing to realize about money, number one, is it is designed. And there are different designs of money possible. We have to always ask about any form of money. First, who has the power to create it? Is it the central bank? Is it the commercial bank? Is it a community, a complementary currency? Second, what character does that money have? Does it bear interest? Or does it have the opposite? It bears a demurrage where it loses value when you hold it instead of gaining value. And thirdly, what can it be used for? And these three design traits, who has the power to create it, its character, and its use, profoundly shape the impacts of money and its distributive consequences. So I think we need to go and, we've got the financial system here, and I briefly said we need to redesign finance so it is in service to the functioning of this real economy, in functioning to human well-being and life. And when we think about redesigning money, we need to think about redesigning money itself. People think it was Marx who said, money that begets money that begets money. This is the problem. It goes back to Aristotle. He defined two kinds of economics. He said, on the one hand is the art of economics, which is about the art of managing your wealth. And then there's the art of crematistics, which is the art of accumulating wealth. And he said, of all forms of getting wealth, this is the most unnatural, where money begets money that begets money endlessly. This is the most unnatural. And to me, this is at the heart of the challenge we have. We live on a finite, delicately balanced planet. But at the heart of the financial system is a form of money that is designed with the expectation of endless gain. And that, I think, is where we run into the deepest contradiction. So I don't have the solution for redesigning money, but I think it's very important that there are different designs of money popping up and emerging. Questions being asked about whether commercial banks should be allowed to create money, or whether the central bank should create the money and then the commercial bank allocates it, to show that there are alternative designs possible. But I'm curious, because you asked this question, I'm curious what you think about the role of design of money.
Oh, there's no free lunch.
There's no free lunch.
Well, we can take it out.
Okay.
All right.
But I think you've gone to the heart of the deepest design challenge we have.
Anyone else? Yeah, I have another question if you don't have.
There's one over there.
Yeah, okay. Who? There. Okay.
Good morning. I'd like to know what would be the most suitable arenas to address these
Sorry, the most.
suitable arenas to address these concerns. How to let's say, get to people to spread the word.
Okay,
And
great question.
Who else? Maybe the lady over there.
Hi. So everything we were talking about is a really structural change in the system. So how do you imagine this happening? Do you imagine something like the states and the state leaders getting together and imagining this change? Like, do you imagine a top-down change? Or do you imagine it starting like from the down part and then going above? What do you imagine?
Okay, so I did not plant these questions, but they were the last things I actually really wanted to talk about. I have some extra pictures thinking, just in case anybody asks. So I profoundly believe that 21st century economics will be practiced first and theorized later. I think the practice of what I'm talking about is running far ahead of the theory. So I look to it actually happening in the world, and I just put in here, let's see, where are they? Here we are. So you mentioned top-down. A former student of mine, where I teach in Oxford, he returned to China, and he sent me this photograph from a conference in Beijing. He said, I'm sitting in Beijing at a conference which is launching China's Renewable Energy Outlook 2017. And the second slide that they put up was the donut. And here in Chinese is a quote from President Xi saying, man must learn to live in harmony with nature and harmony with society. I was amazed by this. If you want top down, this is top down. And I had no contact at all.
As top down as it can be.
This is top down as it can be. But I was fascinated that a senior member of the Chinese bureaucracy responsible for that transformation from fossil fuels to renewable energy, he had chosen this image to symbolize the paradigm that he wanted to bring people into. So I'm now in touch with him, and when my book comes out in China, I'm going to meet up with him and spread the word. So I'm actually answering both questions at the same time. They're beautifully connected. I've been having conversations about this with companies ever since 2012, when this image was first published. And I always invite companies to say, imagine putting your product on this table, whether it's a phone or clothing or food, and asking yourself, is the way you're doing business pushing humanity out of this space, which is sort of the 20th century model of business, or is it bringing humanity in? And the most important thing a company can ask, here are some of the companies I've had these conversations with, the most important thing a company can ask is the design, back to design, the design of the company itself. What is the purpose of the company? The networks it's part of, how it's governed, how it's owned, and ultimately how it's financed, back to money. Because the design of a company profoundly shapes what it can be and do in the world. And I'm always struck that when I have conversations with business, it so often comes down when a company is transforming and you're trying to say, why? Why are you transforming? It's not just a regulation or a market trend. There's always a human story, somebody, often the CEO, often a leading partner, sometimes the newest employee who put their hand up and said, what are we doing about the environment? And that kickstarts change. So I have huge belief in the power of individuals saying, actually, I'm just going to start making this happen, because without that, it doesn't. A couple more. So bottom up. The city of Amsterdam is now using the donut to say, we want to reimagine the future of our city. And we're actually doing this in multiple cities around the world, but starting in Amsterdam. So I held this workshop in Amsterdam in February, working with citizens, saying, what does it mean for you to be thriving people in this place? What would it mean for this place, this city, to be a thriving ecosystem? How do we do that while respecting our impact on the whole planet and all people worldwide? And it was a very, this was a great, exciting moment for me, because people were having really lively conversations. You can see the look in the faces, and you know this tool is helping people. It has no answers in it. The donut has no answers in it, but it invites you to ask different questions and find your own answers for your place and your part of the world. Urban designers in Stockholm sent me this picture. He said, we're designing a new suburb for Stockholm. Here on the screen, this is a railway that's never been opened, and they're going to open it in the future, and there'll be a new suburb here. And he said, look, I've got the donut on my design table because I'm using it to design the world's most sustainable living districts. He said, we're going to call them donut districts. And I thought, what have I done? Back to your point. But it's a mindset shift, and then people are taking it into different parts of their world. And I'm now setting up an organization called Doughnut Economics Action Lab to work with all of these pioneers who are bringing it into their world of work, precisely to support them and to develop these ideas further. City of Amsterdam themselves, these are the officials of the Mayor's Office of Amsterdam using the donut to rethink the future of their own strategic planning. So this is how we're doing it. I have no plan to write any other books. For me, the book is a vehicle for transformation, and I've spent the last 2 and a bit years doing this, because it's about sharing ideas, making it open source, and then inviting people to pick it up and put it into practice in their own world of work. So that's my strategy, to come back to your question of how to spread the word. Make open available videos, create the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and co-create tools with people who actually wanted to put it into practice. We'll practice economics first and theorize it later.
Can you, just one more question? Still have 9 minutes, I guess.
Okay.
Can I abuse the prerogative? Okay, go ahead. No, I can't.
Hello, thank you. I am a researcher, and just a last question. Are you optimistic about this?
No. No. And actually, I say, don't be an optimist if that makes you relax. Oh, it'll be okay. People are ingenious. We have technologies. We've solved problems in the past. It's okay. Calm down. No, if optimism makes you go there, don't be an optimist. But then, at the same time, don't be a pessimist if that makes you give up and say, it's too late. We are too many. It's too hard. It costs too much. Because if you become a pessimist in response to that, then it will be true. And everybody just retreats and gives up. So don't be an optimist if it makes you relax. Don't be a pessimist if it makes you give up. Be an activist, or rather an activator, because each one of us is very influential in our networks. I was in Vienna recently, and after I gave a talk like this, a group of school students came up to me, and a young woman, she said, I really wanted to ask a question, but I'm only 17. And I said, what's your name? Clara. I said, Clara, next time you put your hand up and you say, my name is Clara, I'm 17. I promise you the room will listen to you, because everybody knows that this is your future. Your youth is your power. And by the way, you can connect with all the other 17-year-olds in a way that this 48-year-old cannot touch. And even prime ministers cannot touch. Greta Thunberg has inspired the youth of the world in a way that an adult never could touch. So we all have networks, as a parent, as an employee, as a CEO, as a politician, as a neighborhood member, as a friend, and we can activate in the way that we can do that. So that's my approach. I'm an activator.
One last question. Do you see change happening in the mainstream of economics? Or not? It just came to my mind the last book published by Raghuram Rajan, who was, well, belongs to the mainstream, an economist from Chicago. He teaches at this business school of Chicago, has been governor of the Central Bank of India. And if my memory serves me well, his last book was the missing community, the missing pillar, communities and something. So just
no, but say again. What is the something like the missing pillar?
The missing pillar, community. It was the word is community. The thing is not market. It's not only markets and the state, but economists should take into consideration the role of communities in development. This is just an example. But do you see change happening in the mainstream?
Okay.
Because all the economists you've mentioned do not belong to the mainstream.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's start with this example. Say, fantastic. You've realized that the missing element in economics is community. By the way, it might be the living world too. Maybe that's your next book.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, great. Now, I want to ask you, if you teach Econ 101, what's the first diagram you're teaching? Please don't tell me you're still teaching supply and demand. Because if you start there with the market, then your community will always be missing.
Mm-hmm.
Please tell me you show an image of the economy within the living world, within society. So the danger within the mainstream is that these are little add-on things, but the core teaching doesn't
remains
change.
the same. Yeah.
My book is explicitly aimed at transforming economics. But of
You
all
call
the places,
yourself a renegade economist.
Yes, I do. I do. I'm too embarrassed to call myself an economist because most people say, oh, I think I'll go and talk to somebody else. So my book is aimed at transforming economics teaching. Of all the invitations I've had over the last 2.5 years, in universities, architecture departments, urban studies, sustainability studies, political science, economics is the one that doesn't want to open the door. And I don't knock on shut doors. I go where the energy is. So I'm really fascinated that the economics are, I think they're actually very threatened by it. These are not my crazy ideas. I'm bringing ideas that have been around for decades, some of them for centuries, and they are building up to be irresistibly useful. But I think there's a resistance in the middle of the profession because its professionalism has been built upon a very narrow set of models that actually fall over when you recognize the economy is embedded within a living world. Mm-hmm. So the changes are far too small and far too slow. And what I am encouraged by is the student movement that I mentioned within economics departments, the students who themselves know that they are not being taught a syllabus, a mindset that's fit for their future. And they are demanding that transformation. So I think that when I see change in what's being taught, it's coming only as a result of this pressure. Mm-hmm. So sometimes the economists say to me, you're exaggerating, or come on, you should do this in a more academic way. Change doesn't happen like that. Mm-hmm. Change happens from pressure, from awkwardness, from uncomfortableness that then makes people decide, actually, we're going to own this and we're going to change the syllabus. So I'm going to keep putting this pressure. And kills me, actually, every time students come up to me after I give a talk, their face looking a little bit white and shocked. And they say, but the old economics you were talking about, that's what I'm learning. And they realize that they're trapped in this old system. So it's not changing anything like fast enough. And I think economics is an arrogance. I'm going to be very honest. I think there's an arrogance in the discipline that thinks it can just change a little bit and too slowly. And that won't serve us.
For the records, I'm not an economist myself. So let me finish by saying, long live Doughnut Economics. There can be no better purveyor of this idea than you, Kate. Thank you so much.
Very
Thank you
much.
so much.